Hi, so today we're going to talk a little bit about interpersonal conflict, and hopefully some of this should match up with what you've been reading and what you've been watching and seeing in Friday Night Lights. So to start with, I want to just cover briefly why we study conflict at all. And the major reason is to avoid violence. Conflict can escalate very, very quickly and then get violent. And so if we know how to engage in conflict in a way that is both productive and effective in terms of accomplishing our interpersonal goals, we can avoid that endpoint of violence. In addition, conflict is very emotional and confusing and hard. And a lot of times we don't have many tools for addressing it or dealing with it or making changes as to how we experience it. So hopefully in studying conflict in terms of communication and interpersonal relationships, you might build some tools or options to address some of that cognitive and emotional load when you go into a conflict. Conflict is necessary in order to accomplish your interpersonal goals. So whatever your interpersonal goals might be, at some point they are going to come into conflict with someone else's. And if you want to maintain that relationship or escalate that relationship, conflict is necessary. The other reasons are that conflict is oftentimes very stressful for people, and so it affects their physical health. It affects their physical well-being. If you are constantly in conflict or constantly in a unproductive conflict, you will have physical effects from that. And finally, conflict is very natural and inevitable. We have a kind of myth in our culture that conflict is bad or that conflict is a negative thing, and it actually can be a very positive thing when we pursue it with patience and tools. So I kind of wish that conflict was something that we had multiple connotations for, because I think conflict is necessary, important, and positive for relationships. A lot of times people see the word conflict and think, ooh, no, I hate conflict. I don't want to do anything with conflict. But it's actually really important in order to push relationships forward. So if we looked at the conflict styles that are discussed in your textbook, and then also in the style assessment that you completed, we have two axes for this. And along this axis on the side, we have concern for your own goals. So these are concerned for your self-presentation, relational, and instrumental goals. Along the bottom, we have concern for others' goals. So their self-presentation, instrumental, and relational goals. So depending on how important it is to you for yourself or for the other person to accomplish their goals in a particular situation, that will dictate your conflict style. So if it's important to you to accomplish your own goals, but you don't care at all about the other person accomplishing their goals, that's going to result in a competing style. And then in the handout you have, it says forcing directing. It's the same style. It's competing, where you say, I'm going to win. I'm going to win my goals. I'm going to win my points in this conflict. If you do not care about accomplishing your own goals and you don't care about the other person accomplishing their goals, that will result in a withdrawing or avoiding style. And I shouldn't say care. I should say if you don't pursue accomplishing your own goals or pursue the other party accomplishing their goals, this will result in a withdrawing or avoiding style, where you just sort of don't engage in the conflict or with the other person. On the far end here, we have a situation where someone makes it important for the other party to accomplish their goals, but gives up their own goals in the process. This is accommodating. In this final corner, we have the situation where someone has put is purposely pursuing accomplishing their own goals and the other party's goals. So they are wanting to make sure everybody meets all their goals. That results in collaborating. Oops. And then finally, in the center, we have compromising. And compromising is a little bit of both, because when you compromise, you give up something and the other person gives up something, and you get something and the other person gets something, but something is always lost for both parties, right? And something is always gained, but something is always lost. So this is sort of a partial accomplishment or pursuit of goals for both parties. So these different styles play out constantly through Friday Night Lights, and we're going to take a look at some of the characters that have a preferred style. Everyone has a preferred style, but it's important to keep in mind that you have the opportunity to change your style depending on the situation. It's up to you to make an adjustment if you want to. So what we'll do now is sort of talk through how these different styles are represented on Friday Night Lights, and also take a look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of each of the styles. So we'll start with competing. And Tyra is a great example of competing because Tyra typically pursues her own goals and does not provide a lot of concern or effort in making sure the other party accomplishes their goals. And this results in a lot of competition in her life. And the advantages to this are that she typically accomplishes her instrumental goals above all others and can make very rapid decisions because she knows she wants to accomplish her own goals. The disadvantages is that typically the competing style can hurt your relational goals and your self-presentation goals. If you are someone who typically engages in a competing style, people are going to avoid getting into conflict with you. They're going to avoid you in general. They're going to avoid providing you with feedback, and that can keep your relationship from growing. Also, competing can lead to a very quick escalation in conflict. If all you're pursuing is the accomplishment of your own goals and you have low concern about the other party accomplishing their goals, the conflict is going to escalate very, very quickly. The next style is avoiding or withdrawing. And this is characterized by low concern for accomplishing your own goals and low concern for the other party accomplishing their goals. So we typically see Lila use this style where she just sort of recedes or avoids conflict, especially if we think back to early in the season when she's going to visit Jason. When he pushes her, when he gets angry, when he's instigating conflict, her tactic is to just take off. So that allows her to avoid the conflict. So there are some advantages to this, which is that it allows someone to let some goals go. If you avoid the conflict, you're letting go of your own goals in that situation, and you can work to just let them go entirely, which can be very healthy. It protects the person from harm because if you aren't engaged in a conflict, you can't be hurt. And it's very appropriate for short-term relationships. For people that you don't have a lot of relational goals with, it's very appropriate because there's no reason to go through the process of negotiating the conflict if you're not trying to maintain or escalate the relationship. The disadvantages of this are that people who use withdrawing or avoiding styles are often seen as weak or uncaring. Because they disengage from the conflict, it's perceived that they don't care about the situation, and that's not actually the case. They do care about the situation. They care very much, which is why they have withdrawn. So this is a challenge for someone that is most comfortable with this style because they will often be accused of not caring or not investing in whatever the issue is when really they care a lot, and that's why they've chosen to withdraw. It also causes people to abandon goals. If you withdraw from the conflict, you're not going to be able to accomplish your own goals for the situation, so you're going to have to abandon them. And the other negative here is that it reinforces the idea that conflict is unnatural or bad or damaging. Every time we see someone withdraw from a conflict, it suggests or reinforces that idea that conflict is bad. So if you have a parent who consistently withdrew from conflict over and over and over and over and over again, observing that over time will affect your own ideas about conflict, right? You'll say, conflict is bad. My mom never engaged in conflict. I can't engage in conflict. And that can be a problem because sometimes we need conflict in order to accomplish some of the goals in our life, and we need conflict in order to escalate some of the relationships in our life. The next style is collaborating. And of course, Tammy is our optimal communicator in every situation. So she is our optimal conflict example because she typically pursues collaborating. No matter who she's engaging with, whether it's a student on campus or her husband at home or Julie, she's often concerned with accomplishing her own goals, but also has a lot of concern for accomplishing the other party's goals. I think we see this most clearly when she's navigating the waters with Julie about having sex with Matt, because she's upset, she's emotional, but she's very clear about what her goals are, and she's clear about hearing Julie out. And she does the same thing again later when she talks to Coach Taylor, because he gets very upset, and she sort of again is clear about what her goals are and recognizes what his goals are, and they sort of navigate how to accomplish both of those things. So the advantages to collaborating are that it's very, very satisfying for both parties because everyone is able to pursue their goals. It often leads to very creative solutions because rather than doing this sort of like, okay, you do this and I'll do that and I'll give this up and you give that up, you're figuring out how to make all of the goals work. And collaborating also shows a very high level of commitment. If someone is collaborating with you, it means they are committed to the relationship because they're investing time and energy into working out this solution. It's very good for long-term relationships because it leaves no room for resentment at a later point, and it enhances instrumental goals and relational goals. If you accomplish your relational goals and your instrumental goals through collaborating, that's going to be perceived more positively than if you accomplish them through competing. The disadvantages is that it requires a lot of energy and a lot of time. In order to really successfully collaborate, you have to spend a lot of time and energy discussing the different goals, thinking about how they fit together, thinking about where they diverge, assessing what might work for the situation, etc. And so that takes a lot of investment. The other disadvantage is that it can be faked. Someone can pretend to collaborate and then resent the outcomes. They can be untrue about what their goals are, and then the outcomes maybe aren't actually meeting their goals because they haven't been upfront about what the goals are. So the collaboration has been faked. And that can be frustrating for both parties because, well, especially for the party that's been lied to some degree, right? You think you've come to this great solution, but it turns out that some of the goals weren't on the table, and so you didn't know. And it's very frustrating if not reciprocated. So if you are working to accomplish both parties' goals and the person you are engaged with is only interested in accomplishing their own goals or is not interested in accomplishing any goals, it can be very, very challenging to continue to try to collaborate because it feels unbalanced. You can see from that chart, if we go back to it, collaboration is way out here on the corner, right? And that means that it's always at odds with something, unless the other party is choosing to collaborate too. So the next style is accommodating. And accommodating is where you have low concern for accomplishing your own goals and very high concern for the other person accomplishing their goals. I think Matt is a great example of this. We typically see Matt use accommodating where he's like, okay, what do you want? Yeah, all right, yeah, we'll make it happen. And that accommodation has some advantages, but it also has some disadvantages. So the advantages are that it's very, very reasonable. People think that you are very easy to get along with because you are. You're always working to make sure they accomplish their goals. It avoids harm to self because you're not investing your own goals in the situation. And it does improve relationships, especially when there are power dynamics. If you have a boss or someone that has more power than you in a relationship, being accommodating is valuable because in terms of the relationship and the context of the relationship and maintaining the relationship, many times choosing to accommodate that person is the most appropriate choice. And so that tends, if you are an accommodating employee, the people who are above you will see that favorably. The disadvantages is that it can communicate a lack of power. And that makes sense, right? Because if you accommodate someone, you're making sure they accomplish their goals, but you're sort of ceding your own goals in the process. And so it can be read as not having any power or being a pushover, things like that. It tends truly to ignore relational goals because you have relational goals. And if you cede all of your goals in accommodating another party, you give those up, including your relational goals. So maybe you have the goal to maintain or escalate a relationship and someone comes to you and says, I really don't think this is working for me. And you go, okay, right? You give up your relational goals in that situation. You don't get a chance to fight for them. And you also tend to sacrifice your instrumental goals. Same thing. Maybe you're with a friend and you really want to see Pitch Perfect. You really want to see it. Like you want them to go see Pitch Perfect with you. And what they say is, I really want to see Mad Max. And you say, okay. And you go with them. So you sacrifice your instrumental goal in that situation also. So if you're constantly accommodating, you're giving up all your goals to some degree. And that means that you don't have opportunities to pursue them the same way. unless they match what the other person has shared. But that wouldn't be the case in conflict, right? In conflict, the goals don't match. So if you're accommodating, you're giving those up. The last style is compromising. And this is where we have moderate concern for accomplishing our own goals and moderate concern for the other party accomplishing their goals. And so we tend to kind of do a quid pro quo situation. And I think we see Coach Taylor do this a lot, right? If we think back to the situation with Smash, he sort of says, like, I'll do this and you'll do this and we'll be okay, kind of thing. And that's sort of how he operates. He tends to collaborate more with Tammy and Julie, which is appropriate for their relationships. And he even tends to withdraw or avoid some of the conflicts that he might have with someone like Buddy. Some of them he engages in, but again, that's appropriate for the relationship because he doesn't necessarily have a lot of investment in escalating that relationship with Buddy. So for the most part, we see a mix for Coach Taylor, and I think that results in a lot of compromising. So the advantages are when compromising takes place is that both parties accomplish some goals, right? So everybody can be a little bit satisfied because they get something. The other thing is it's very efficient and it's very reasonable, right? Everybody gets something that can be decided on very quickly, and it allows for maintaining relational goals, right? Because everybody gets something. So whatever those relational goals are, they tend to be maintained. The disadvantages are that it can be easy but counterproductive because it can breed resentment. When compromising occurs when really what might need to occur is collaboration, that resentment can be very, 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 very real. The negative here, other negatives here are that it limits creativity because rather than looking at what might be possible for both parties accomplishing their goals, everybody has to give something up. So it sort of stops the thinking at, okay, what am I willing to give up rather than how can we accomplish all of this? And that, of course, compromising requires sacrifice on the parts of both parties. Both people have to accomplish or sacrifice some goals. So that can be frustrating. So anytime we go into a conflict, we have two choices to make, and those choices are going to dictate the style that we end up using in that situation. We always have a choice about whether we're going to confront the conflict or avoid the conflict. And then we always have a choice about whether we're going to cooperate in the conflict or compete in the conflict. So when you make a choice to confront or avoid, you make a choice about whether you're going to engage with the conflict and pursue your goals or whether you're not going to do that. And so this is the y-axis of our chart up here, right? Are we going to confront our conflict and pursue our goals, or are we going to let them go or avoid pursuing them in this situation? So that's the first choice. The second choice is about whether we're going to cooperate or compete. And that is the x-axis on our chart, right? It's this way. So if we're going to cooperate, right, that's cooperating with the other party's goals. If we're going to compete, that's just making sure we get our own goals. So these two choices dictate what styles you end up using. And when we choose to avoid and compete, so that would be when we choose to use a forcing or directing or competitive style or avoiding or withdrawing style, we tend to make the source of the conflict internal on the other party. We make more internal attributions about that other person. They're mean, they're bad, and those internal attributions tend to be more negative and affect our relational perceptions with those people. So we tend to see the other party as being more internally negative. These choices also reflect on us in the same way. So if we make the avoid compete choice in a conflict, we also get assessed as being more internally negative. Conversely, if we choose to confront and cooperate, we tend to make more external attributions about the conflict and the individual we're in conflict with, right? Like, oh, they're really tired from work, or, oh, we've had a really rough week, things like that. And it leads to more positive relational perceptions. And that's important because we know that our perceptions make our reality to some degree. And if we want to help shape the reality of the people around us and shape the reality of our own lives, we have to also think about the perceptions of our conflict choices. So confronting and cooperating tend to lead to more positive relational perceptions. The last thing I want to mention is that we tend to make a lot of attribution errors, especially when we are in conflict. And when we are in conflict with someone, we tend to over-attribute the sources of the conflict. And so when we're engaged in this exchange about the conflict, we're constantly trying to figure out where all these ideas or feelings are coming from. And so we attribute them constantly in our thinking. And remember, we make attributions through our schema and through consensus and all of those things. So the truth is we can't always know why someone is making the demands they are, or why someone is having the feelings they're having or sharing the things they're sharing. But we tend to make internal attributions that are negative when we are unhappy. So the conflict choices you make affect the attributions, but also just your feelings affect the attributions. So when you're unhappy, you tend to make negative internal attributions of the other party. And we don't want to admit that it could be partly us that's causing that negativity. So we tend to say it's all about them, it's something inside. And this is important, especially when we start to think about relationships and long-term relationships, because dissatisfied couples, so couples that are consistently dissatisfied with each other, when you talk to them and they talk about their partners, they make more negative attributions that are internal. So they will say they're just rotten inside, or they have such a big ego, right? They're making negative internal attributions. Satisfied couples, people that are more satisfied in their relationships, consistently verbalize more positive external attributions, right? So they're really satisfied in their job. They really know how to make other people feel good, right? They talk about what they do externally and how those are positive things. So this is important to consider, because if you remember, we make the attribution about someone else. That's something we do inside. So how we attribute someone else's behavior affects how we think about them. So this is something I have to check myself on regularly, because I will find myself making a negative internal attribution and then asking myself, maybe I should be making an external attribution for negative behavior, or or maybe this is a positive attribution in a different light. So this is a very important perceptive check to go through, because it can really change how you look at a whole relationship. So I hope this helps you as you're thinking about conflict and as you're getting ready to talk more about relationships next week. Please let me know if you have any questions, and have a really great day. Thanks.